Stop this madness now.
Protesters turn out in droves to oppose the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Thousands of people are rallying in protest of the Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion. The protest began this morning at about 10:30 with protesters making their way from the Lake City Way SkyTrain station in Burnaby to the Kinder Morgan tank farm. Several roads were affected, including Lake City Way between Lougheed Highway and Broadway. And many people have been taking public transit to get to the protest. It's expected to last throughout the day.
I'm so against this pipeline. Global warming is the biggest issue ever facing mankind. The planet is already way too hot. We've got storms, floods, fires. We cannot do this.
An injunction has been granted to stop anti-pipeline activists from protesting at 2 Burnaby terminals. It comes the day after Alberta Premier Rachel Notley threatened to cut oil shipments to BC over the pipeline dispute. Paul Johnson has more.
One thing might ultimately turn into the restriction of supply.
Forget the wine wars. If Alberta Premier Notley follows through on her threat to turn down the tap on fuel shipments to BC, that might truly feel like the nuclear option.
This would have untold implications almost immediately. Rolling shortages at many gas stations.
Analysts see truckers not being able to get diesel and even airplanes avoiding YVR if they can't get jet fuel. If BC wants to toy with the idea of blocking a pipeline, Notley wants to remind BC where they get much of their gas from.
Notley's strategy is based on two things. One, the Lower Mainland is where most of the opposition to the pipeline is coming from. And two, this area already has some of the highest gas prices in North America.
On paper, it's a menacing threat, but will it work?
It's a fraught measure, potentially, both because it would imply costs to the Alberta government. You reduce the supply of oil, you'll get less revenue from oil, and there are also unanticipated consequences.
But however governments deal with the new threat from Edmonton, there's another wild card in the mix. The coalition of environmentalists and First Nations willing to risk arrest is only strengthening. Consider this man's challenge to Prime Minister Trudeau for a boxing match over his support for the project.
And I'm challenging you, tough guy, ordinary guy, to do the right thing. Come on, where are you?
They came by the thousands, peaceful protesters who say they're angry it's come to this.
BC does not want a pipeline, and it's not in the national interest.
I think that this is a big mistake, and I'm here because I have kids and I want my grandkids to have BC to enjoy.
And everywhere there were signs making clear the frustration, the fears, and the political fallout.
I worked on Trudeau's campaign because he seemed like the best possible environmental choice, and he has betrayed the province of BC, even though he was a teacher here. He's betrayed his children.
Kinder Morgan's going to appeal. Doesn't matter, we'll win in Supreme Court too.
This protest coming just a day after a temporary BC Supreme Court injunction was granted to Kinder Morgan, barring protesters from coming within 50 meters of the worksite in an effort to stop them from inhibiting the National Energy Board-approved Trans Mountain Pipeline. Those marching today walking right past the injunction zone. One Vancouver City Councillor saying moves like that only strengthen their resolve.
Everybody seems to be more on that path of recognizing this is a turning point in our planet's history. We cannot be drilling out more bitumen, more oil, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and give our children a safe future.
And by the looks of this so-called watchtower, those here are in it for the long haul.
The war over the Kinder Morgan pipeline escalating to a new level today.
Alberta Premier Rachel Notley making a threat to turn off the tap on oil to BC should the NDP government continue to block the expansion of the pipeline. Catherine Urquhart reports.
Think the price of gas is high now? Well, it could get worse. Much worse, Alberta's throne speech threatening to cut oil exports as it battles BC over the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion.
We reaffirm we will do whatever it takes.
One thing might ultimately turn into the restriction of supply down the road, and there are various ways in which that can be used with various different outcomes. And so that's something that you may see legislation to allow us to do this session.
Turning off the taps would have dramatic results.
Yeah, it's $1.50 right now. It would go to $2, another 50 cents, perhaps even as much as $1, depending how long it takes to be resolved.
As for BC finding another supplier, options are limited.
If you got rid of 60% of our supply here, where does it come from? There is no West Coast supply. There is. It would have to come from overseas. Where would they put it? There is no infrastructure.
Back in 1980, Alberta's Premier Peter Lougheed restricted his province's oil exports in response to Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's National Energy Program.
I see no reason to believe that Alberta is going to take an unfair or unlawful action against British Columbia. We've referred an issue of contention to the courts. We believe that's where legal issues should be determined, and that will play out over time.
A major spike in oil prices, not what anyone wants.
I'll be pretty mad, right? Like it's ridiculous for sure.
It will affect. It affects every taxpayer because we have the highest gas rates in Canada, gas prices in Canada, and it's not fair.
That price at the pump, perhaps, to go much higher.